All right, we will go ahead and get started. So thank you so much for joining us for Building a Pathway to Resilience, the Role of Belonging in Student Success. We're joined by Dr. Kathleen Crosby and Kathy Zambrana from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And if you would like to enable live captioning, you can do that at the bottom of your screen. I'm so excited for our presentation. So with that, I will turn it over to our presenters.
Okay, thanks, Molly. I'm Kathleen. Kathy's here, but she's not going to share her sound, but we're going to talk concurrently on it. We'll share our slides and then we'll get started in terms of introducing ourselves and the like. We just wanted you to know that you're welcome to put any questions you have in chat, or we'll have time at the end for it as well, but we hope to have an interactive presentation for you, and we hope that you take us with any sort of technical woes that might happen. As you know, sometimes it sort of freezes, if you will. So we're here today from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where we both work for the Academic Support Program for Student Athletes. I'm Kathleen Crosby. I'm a learning specialist at UNC. We work across sports. So I work across sports with at-risk students in terms of whatever way that might be marked, whether it's academic preparation, familial backgrounds, and the like. And I have a commitment towards education, I think particularly to student success with belonging. And I turn it over to Kathy, my colleague.
Hi, everyone. I am Kathy Zambrana. I am an academic counselor here at UNC with the football team. This is my 8th year with UNC football, and it has been an extraordinary experience. And at my entire time here, similar to Kathleen, just devoted to continuing to make sure that we're supporting our students and that we're adapting to changes and making sure that they are receiving the best support in the country.
Okay. And so I think whenever we meet people from other institutions, it's always helpful to sort of frame our own positionality in terms of what our program looks like, and maybe the ways in which belonging looks different in our school or might look similar to your school, or the ways in which belonging might come into play. So Kathy will speak for us and sort of our university.
So just to contextualize it a little bit, what we're talking about today, and so our university, we have this really great big university. We have about 19,000 students on campus, with 800 of those being student athletes. So we really have a large student athlete population. In terms of our students as a whole, across the university, 34% are underrepresented minorities. So they identify as either Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino. 65% identify as non-underrepresented minorities. So just to get an idea of who our students are, we have about 19% that are first-generation college students. A large portion of our students on campus are coming from the state of North Carolina, many of which are coming from rural areas, where oftentimes they have limited access to technology and other resources. But we do really have a global student population. Our students represent 95 different countries and come from all across the country. So really a really expansive student population that we have here.
Okay. And I think as we're thinking about the ways in which our students, or all students, sort of experience the transition to college and sort of trying to figure out where they belong and what belonging looks like, I think all of us have to consider the ways in which the past 2 years have compounded students' sense of belonging. And so what we have here for you, and we may be able to throw it in chat, yep, we'll see if we can, but just this week, on the April 5th, the April 5th issue of the Chronicle had an article called "The Stunning Level of Student Disconnection," and it speaks the way in which COVID is impacting classroom behaviors, outside classroom behaviors, and in which the case professors are talking about the ways in which students feel incredibly under strain, uncertain, and the way it's affecting attendance, the way it's affecting participation, where it's affecting grades and assessments. And as all of us sort of try to negotiate this space, I guess we're really curious about what has it meant for the past 2 years for students to be outside of the classroom experience, to be remote, and the ways in which that's impacted their sense of belonging to a university, to a classroom, to a professor, as well as to friends and the social networks that we expect college to happen. So I think we're entering this question from multiple lenses.
So our focus today, what we really wanted to do is, based on the experiences obviously that we've had for the past 2 years through the pandemic, and that we continue to see education and university campuses evolve to, is how can we look at the concept of belonging and understand it in a way that impacts resilience and student success? So we want to consider factors that might impact belonging. We define what belonging is, and then strategize how things like mentorship and academic structures in our academic success support facilities or on campus can help foster that sense of belonging. And what we hope is that by recognizing and looking to these things, that we can use belonging as a key outcome of academic support programming, so that we can, in the long run and ultimately, create more resilient students.
Okay. And I think to begin that as a starting point, yeah, when Google Slides freezes. Oh, but somehow it reappeared. When we look at that to begin with, I think we have to turn to Angela Duckworth, who I'm sure at this point, obviously, we are incredibly familiar with 15 years later. But to start with the idea of grit and the way in which scholars, educators, workplace considerations have looked at grit as sort of this predeterminant of academic success, personal success, and the like. Duckworth defines it both as perseverance and passion, the way in which you're sort of working hard, holding on despite challenges. And we realize, for those of you who work with student athletes, that that's key to athletic performance. What is that sort of loss? What does that sort of injury do in the moment? What are the challenges that you face in your sport? But we equally think about it in terms of academic support as well. What does it mean when you don't get the grade you wanted? Or what does it mean when that assignment doesn't get quite in? Or what does it mean when the space seems overwhelming? So how do we, as academic support professionals, encourage our students to maintain effort and interest, and so that they are able to come over those rises and falls in their academic careers? We can broaden out the concept of grit, though, too, and look at what skills allow me to persevere and to have passion. And we look then to a definition offered in 2014 from the International Society for Trauma Stress Studies, which actually gives us some concrete tools to sort of name what's behind grit. And they speak about the way in which relationship matters, the way in which care and empathy matters, the way in which being able to self-regulate your emotions and be aware of who you are can matter too. And the idea that you have a focus to the future and have some degree of motivation that allows you to have that growth mindset and grow and adapt and respond. And so I think starting with that idea of grit and yes, persevere, yes, get through this. But Kathy and I suggest that there's something missing from that consideration, because we can persevere, but maybe there's something else we need to consider. Hoping we advance.
So I think we've all experienced this year. I mean, COVID has had an incredible impact on how our students learn, and beyond that, how our students build community. This is something that Kathleen and I talk about constantly. During COVID-19, you know, our students were back home, some were in isolated spaces. I think sometimes we saw faculty who didn't understand that some of our students are going back to areas where they don't have reliable internet, where they, you know, don't have safe home environments, or they don't want to let the classroom into their home environment. So all of these, you know, various factors that can be very isolating and can really change and impact a student and their ability to stay motivated and to be ultimately successful in the classroom, and overall, obviously, the effect that it has on their mental health. There have been so many studies that have come out recently just looking at college student experiences, and students are increasingly experiencing higher levels of depression and stress and anxiety. Mental health is such an important and key factor, and I think that COVID-19 and the isolation that was created by it in the learning space really added to that, right? Because, you know, students come to a college campus, and whether you're a student athlete or not, you find a community somewhere. Our student athletes are lucky in that they have that student athlete community amongst each other. Other students may join student groups, whatever it may be. But then COVID changed that, and as we're kind of transitioning back to that on-campus life, students are still experiencing and feeling that loss of community and that loss of what we're going to talk about today, which is that belonging. So students are trying to manage all those factors right now, including on top of navigating financial hardship, having health-related concerns, you know, family members who may have passed due to COVID-19 or other health-related issues. all of these different changes that have pushed them to change how they learn, where they learn, and deal with more things. And so on top of that, our student athletes are also dealing with the stress of competition, the stress of injury, the stress of being far away from home and family members, especially during a pandemic. So a lot of this has really had a negative impact on not just student learning and the creations of isolation, but retention and persistence. Some studies have found that undergraduates have even postponed graduation, taken time away from college, and dropped out of school. And so we really want to kind of look into and peel away, why is this happening and what can we do as we transition back to on-campus life, where some institutions may still be online? What can we do to foster that community and that sense of belonging? Historically, for marginalized populations who face significant barriers, their ability to feel like they belong, the pandemic has just heightened this. And so this is really important to us. And I think it's something that we think about and that we see every day when we're working with our student athletes.
So what we want to do is to take those two ideas that we see as predominantly affecting the student population. Particularly, we know that grit is a marker of academic success and follow through and growth mindset. But we also know that students are combating these feelings of disassociation, and it is very real and it isn't disappearing. That we want to look at the ways in which talking through belonging might prove some sort of underpinning and solution to both of those. And so the first thing we want to start with is, well, why does belonging matter? Well, researchers actually prove that belonging and feeling that you belong, whether it's to a school, a classroom, a team, is actually a contributing factor to your academic success. That the more that you feel connected to that teacher, that classroom, those classmates, etc., you are more likely to succeed. So in addition, the idea of being connected to a university, whether big or small, feeling that you have some degree of social support in the form of mentorship and the ability to be celebrated and supported throughout your career helps. And finally, what we therefore would like to think about is the way in which we, as academic support specialists, as this third space on college campuses, can foster a sense of belonging. It's a challenging space for us in terms of thinking about how connected we might be to main campus, as we like to say. Are we seen as sort of part of those discussions? Are we seen as sort of outside? And how do we sort of within our sphere talk through belonging with our students? So yes, they feel as if they belong here, but they also feel like they belong to the larger campus community. And to us, that's sort of crucial to think through. And so, yeah, you can take this one.
So kind of two things that we want to be thinking about. What allows a student to feel like they belong? What is it about that that's so important? And what threatens that sense and feeling of belonging? And how do we identify those two things so that we can then create programming and support structures that foster that so that our students can be resilient learners and adaptive to the different environments and situations?
Okay, and to answer those questions, the two primary characteristics that allow students to belong in an educational situation are, number one, a sense of academic identity / belonging, as well as a sense of social identity and belonging. So that idea of, do you see yourself as a student within a certain space? In what ways is it manifested? Who demonstrates it to you? And similarly, do you find a group of like-minded individuals and you feel connected as a person? So those two sort of measures are key, and key to us thinking about our programming. In what way do we help students build academic identity? And in what ways do we help students build social networks to feel connected? Threats to social belonging can be any sort of identity marker that makes you feel other, whether it's your race, whether it's your gender identity, whether it's your position as a first generation student, or is there something in your life that keeps you away from the campus experience to the full extent? Sometimes it's your sport, sometimes it's your work, sometimes it's responsibilities at home. All of those things that might pull you from that academic identity and that social identity within the campus frames are threats to you feeling connected in a larger term. Yes, you can still succeed, but absolutely you're challenged in different ways. And we are asked to sort of think about all our students and the diversity of experience they bring and what that might look like. So
So complicating belonging. Is belonging enough?
Ooh, sorry.
So the simple answer is you can belong to an institution, right? Our students come to these universities and they belong to an institution, they belong to the sports teams that they compete with, a workplace. But more important is how you perceive that. What is your self-perception of how you see yourself and your presence in that space? Those things matter. I was talking to Kathleen earlier and she said, do you feel heard? Do you feel like you have a voice? Are you empowered? Those things matter, and they matter more than I think people think and give credit to.
Okay. And I think when we start thinking about those of us who might be on campuses that are primarily white institutions, those of us who have a socioeconomic status that the majority of the students are, or come from a certain region, that a student who is outside of that template of the traditional student is of that university might feel on the outside, and they might feel like their voice doesn't matter. So scholarship not only talks about the idea of like belonging, but do you feel like you matter, and how do we find that? And so when we talk about the idea of mattering, like think about it in our workplace, our family lives, whatever it might be. What does it mean to matter? Someone depends on us, right? They look for us, they ask us questions, they know that we're sort of there. They regard us as important. And finally, they actively pay attention to us. So I guess as we continue this thread throughout the conversation today, we want you to think about the ways in which we foster a sense of our students feeling like someone depends on them, that they have autonomy and authority, that they are seen as important in the space, and finally, that someone is paying attention to. And that can take a range, and we'll go through a bit in terms of programming, but it simply could be a matter of, in what ways do you afford your students a sense of voice, and how do we let that gear where we go in terms of programming?
So unpacking the concept of mattering. So what does that mean? What does it mean to matter? Kathleen spoke to this a little bit, but mattering is a motive. So it's a feeling like what Kathleen just said, that people depend on us, people care about us, they're interested in what we are interested in. They care about not just how we produce on the field, but our overall success, right? How we see ourselves, and there's power in that.
I'll take it over. We can speak specifically about the past 2 years and the way in which we talk about mental health, mental wellness, particularly of student athletes, but all student athletes across our campuses. And in many ways, the concept of mattering is highly tied to students' physical health as well as their psychological health. If I feel like I matter, then I am more likely to be resilient. I'm more likely to feel connected. I'm more likely to succeed. And so if I don't feel like I've mattered, if I'm sitting on the bench for the season, right? Or injured, or outside the classroom experience and sort of on Zoom, and I'm just a voiceless like name on a screen, right? All of a sudden that sense of mattering is affecting how I perceive myself as belonging, and is affecting my academic achievement or the possibility for it. And so our focus today is to think about mattering in the way in which it matters, because it does. It matters in terms of long-term persistence and graduation. And those of us concerned about graduation rates of highly marginalized population, we want to think about the ways in which we can create spaces in our work and across campus that can allow students to feel like they matter. And I guess I'll do the last sentence too, and then throw it to Kat. And so therefore, we need to make sure our programs, our practices, and our policies, obviously taking from Schlossberg, but believe it fervently myself, is that we need to make sure our programs center mattering and students in that way.
So we created this model in terms of how can we actually increase student belonging? What does that mean? And how do we create that sense of mattering? And this is adapted from educational literature to this space to understand the role of belonging and resilience. So when we look at resilience, belonging can include mentorship it can include mentorship, creating safe spaces for our students, the academic structures and support systems that we put in place, and then how we help and how students themselves build that self-belief in themselves. For us, that's academically, right? How do they develop that academic identity and that knowing and that feeling that that they can do, that they can be successful in the classroom. So those 4 factors we primarily focus on when we're looking at the concept of belonging and how it can ultimately help build and create resilient students.
Okay, and so what we'd like to do following this is kind of talk through them. We have 5 sort of talking points for us, but we know it's a Friday afternoon. We know it's been a long semester and a long year, 2 years, etc. But we'd love to hear your voice in terms of as we talk through these topics with you. We have 5 sort of questions around them. We're going to go into 2 in depth in terms of what we specifically sort of do in our program to kind of center belonging. And as I said, the interchange with ideas, learning from each other would be great in terms of it. So for us, we'd like to focus on sort of like 5 primary points and ways in which we can think about academic support programming that centers belonging. The first being creation of safe spaces where in your building, office, campus, do students feel safe and feel as if they belong? How do you deliver your advising/coordinator services? What does that look like? And how does that center belonging, both within that space, but also larger campus ones? How about your tutor programming? Do you think about how belonging can play a role in terms of tutoring and tutor training? And we can kind of talk through that a little bit as well. As a background, as a learning specialist sitting here, for those of you who have programs with learning specialists or mentors or assistant learning specialists or counselors in a hybrid role providing academic support spaces as well, like what can you do in terms of how you deliver those services that might help create a larger sense of belonging for students? And I mean, we can't talk about belonging without talking about like student programming and transition programming. And we'll say honestly, as we went to do this, we're like all 5 of these could probably be its own presentation. So we hope to hit some of them generally and 2 in depth, but there's the opening moment. What does that look like in terms of supporting a student's sense of belonging? So we're going to throw it to you now, hopes, fingers crossed.
So what are the spaces in your offices that you feel students feel safe in or like they belong? And you guys can participate in the chat as well.
Or unmute and share.
I can start. So I think this year, creating safe spaces or these past 2 years has been very different. I think I always tell Kathleen she is the master of creating safe spaces on Zoom. She does an incredible job of having her students, they'll log into Zoom and taking a moment to just ask about their day, how are they doing? And they all just start talking to each other and talking about all the, the different things that they're doing. And as silly as it sounds, even having that little moment really helps to foster a community and create a sense of belonging with each other. It really helped through Zoom. And now in person, as we're transitioning back, making sure that our offices are safe spaces, that our students feel like they can open up, making sure that we're connecting them to the appropriate resources. We have students who lost family due to COVID, who have experienced significant financial hardship because of COVID, or were already experiencing financial hardship with their family, and it was only aggravated by COVID-19. And so making sure that our students, one, have a safe space and room and area to let that out. I think sometimes we are go, but just taking a moment and just saying, how are you doing? How is your day going? How is this going on in your day? Is really, really important, but then also connecting them to the resources that they need, making sure that if they do need the mental health support or whatever it is, whatever resource it is, encouraging them, if they're going through something, encouraging them to go talk to their professor in office hours, something that they're all scared to do, they don't want to do, and helping them, what do you bring up in office hours? And because what I told my students all the time is they want you there, they want to hear what's going on in your life, and that's really helped a lot, is helping them break barriers with speaking with faculty and connecting with faculty, but also knowing that they can always come here and either get the support services that they need or have a safe space to just kind of open up.
Right. And I think I threw the question in chat if anyone sort of wants to speak to that as well. But I think Kathy's sort of reply, I see a message, I'll pull it up in a second. But I think it's like what creates safety and what creates a sense of belonging? Is it attributable to a person? Is it actually a space in terms of design, which you have like hanging in the walls of your office, how big or small it is, and just sort of what your furniture looks like in your offices and in your centers, and the ways in which students experience that sense of place across like multiple dimensions. So this is our talking point one. As I said, we're going to go through details.
One of the things I do in my office, for example, I have student art. So I have all my student athletes who are artists or have written poetry. I have it all up. And so when they come in or other students come in, they can see that and celebrate it. And again, foster that community. Oh, I'm an artist too, or I have this that I like to do. And that just kind of opens them up and again, creates that sense of belonging.
Right. And Lindsay's comment also reminds us of the ways in which like we don't function simply, or we hopefully always don't function as like, what's your grade and this sort of stop point in terms of it, but recognizing the person in front of you and seeing where they're from and how they're doing on that particular day, as Lindsay reminds us, is the way that we feel like we belong, right? Because otherwise, do I feel like I'm just like checking in for grades and that's all I am, is like a statistic to whoever. And I think that is sort of the first way. So I think if anything, our first sort of takeaways are, what are we doing as individuals, as professionals, in our demeanor and the like, but also in terms of what's around and what we sort of do and how we celebrate students and all of their identities in terms of it. I think based on that, I'm going to turn to the second one, which I think our big talking ones are 3 and 4, but we'll get there, we promise. Our second question for consideration, as we click through, is for those of you who are perhaps advisors, counselors, coordinators. And our reflection question here is, how does your own approach to advising center the concept of belonging? It builds right on what Lindsay was just saying in terms of like, what does it look like when a student comes into my office? And what am I doing in my practice to kind of support?
I really love what Molly just posted in the chat. She makes it a point to have a personal connection with a student at least once every meeting. So, and I agree, one simple question, what's going on in your mind today? Like what's weighing on you? It can open up, that one simple question can open up so much and get them to talk and help you learn so much more about them, which ultimately will help you learn what's going to help them be successful and what's going to motivate them and what's going to, how do you empower them? I wholeheartly agree with Molly's comment. I do something similar when I'm working with, I do the exact same thing when I'm working with my students. The first few minutes are always devoted to, how are you doing? How is this going? I remember you told me this last time. How is that? How's, so-and-so doing? Just because it matters, and being genuine about it, I think makes a big difference. I love what Nicole said, always has music playing in her office. It is an opportunity for them to talk freely, makes them feel comfortable, makes them feel like they can be themselves. I think sometimes when students walk through campus, especially at bigger institutions, you can get lost or feel like you have to act a certain way, and you feel like you wear this, not a costume but it almost like you have to fit this mold of what a student is, and to create those spaces where you can kind of just take that off and just take a breath and be yourself. I remember a student told me one time, he had left a class and he's like, Kat, I'm not a robot. And so making sure that our students know that they can be themselves, like, they were in a classroom where they felt they had to just be on the entire time. And so doing things like talking about family and friends and sports, like Nicole brings up, I think is so important.
In terms of it, you're right, and random reach out, and also affirmation too, yes, in terms of feeling that you support, and that way can sort of build those feelings of resilience as well. It sounds like you all are sort of doing this innately in terms of what we do, and so we wanted to bring us perhaps to like a space that, sorry y'all, somehow tutoring services, right? And I think this becomes an interesting sort of space because, at least for us, these are our part-time, like temporary employees who might be here a semester, a year, multiple years, but in so many ways are the individuals that our students are interacting with perhaps more one-on-one or on a more continuing weekly basis even than a counselor they might be checking in with. So I guess I'm kind of curious, and we do have some talking points for this one, I promise, at least in terms of what we've tried to do in terms of centering belonging as a key outcome within our tutoring program. But I'm just wondering if, like, in what ways you might be thinking about how does tutoring, your tutors, your mentors, how does belonging play a role there? And whether their interactions with the students actually during tutoring, academic sessions, or in terms of your training, and are you centering that in any way? And how can we start to unpack how tutoring can be an arm of belonging? I'll give it a couple of seconds or in that kind of pause for the minute or so in chat before I kind of talk through some of the things that we've done specifically.
Can you hear me?
Oh, Nicole, it'd be great to hear you. We can. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So I actually run our study hall program, and it's called Colonial Focus, and FOCUS stands for Free Opportunity to Collaborate, Unite, and Succeed. And it was actually designed by a student who was not a student athlete, but cared compassionately about making sure that the student athletes felt like they had a safe place to really get that support. So it was designed by a student. But anyway, the reason I was bringing it up about belonging is because what I find is that non-student athletes who work in this program and support the student athletes, when they see that they've done well at a game or they're student athlete of the week, they make a point to actually tell the students. And so with COVID, of course, we've been virtual, but they still make a point to say, hey, I saw you were student athlete of the week, or they see them anywhere. And so that helps with that delivery, because now the student athletes don't feel like they're being judged when they're getting that support. They now feel like, oh, you care about me as a person. And so they get that connection, and that has been huge. Yes, I'll put it in the chat.
Nicole, it's phenomenal. I guess I have two questions, right? So you have all undergrads as your tutors, right? So they're fellows sort of.
Yeah, actually I have, so I have undergraduate and graduate, but okay. I literally run the program myself. And so I was the tutor coordinator when I started, but anyway, with that allows, like I said, the students to do that. We also have faculty members who are in our writing lab, and they do the same thing. So I try to give them insight that. And so that's why, again, the student who designed our name literally did it because they all hate the word study hall, right? And I think somebody just put that in the chat. They all hate that. It's a negative thing. But ever since we've been using this term, and we've been using it now for 4 years. She designed it 4 years ago. And she is a teacher, and that's what she's doing by trade. But the students love it because they go, nope, I've got to go to Colonial Focus, not I'm doing this. So does your training, I just wanted to share that.
Oh, I love it. Does your training account for, like, or is that just a natural, I don't even know what I'm asking, but you know what I'm asking, Nicole, like when someone's celebrating someone, it's like affirmation and that sort of part of.
Yeah, that is a part of our training for CRLA.
Yeah.
So I've gone through that. And so again, that's a part of that certification that they learn how to do that. But some of them just do it on their own. They will send me a Google chat message. Hey, I saw this. Is it okay to say something? Or they'll send me an email and say, can you make sure the student athlete know that I said this? And I'm like, sure. And I will pass it along. So I love that when the regular students or traditional students see it, they really feel that connection, because then they're not so scared to ask for help because they know that that person truly cares about them on and off whatever platform they are.
Right. Wonderful, Nicole. Thanks for sharing.
Sure. And I'll put that acronym in for the chat for everyone.
Yeah, oh, guys, I'm so sorry. I was trying to pull up. I knew I had another chat and I just closed it. In terms of it, I feel like we do nothing compared to what Nicole does, because what we wanted to speak a little bit about, like, what sense of belonging might be attributable to, like, three sort of intersections in will. Something that we're always sort of consciously thinking about at UNC, and I'm sure across multiple universities, is DEI initiatives. And so we're thinking about in which way our hiring practices matter and what way they can support a sense of belonging. So who are my tutors? Who are my mentors? What are their backgrounds? What are their experiences? And how can that help support our student athletes and sort of foster a sense of belonging? And you're right. I mean, Nicole is also asking us to consider the ways in which we encourage our tutors to feel like they belong to a larger community, to connect to the student athlete population, to connect to like the work that they're doing and the like. I think too about the way in which we center our tutor training and concept of belonging. What we've done for the past 2 years is we've run a section that we call the intersectionality of the student athlete. And we really dive into like who our student athlete is, what their experiences are like. We bring a panel of us across ASPSA, both in terms of counselors, learning support, but we also get a representative from our sports psych program to just talk about the experience, the mindset, the motivation, and what that sort of looks like. Can you understand who's in front of you, so that you can foster a sense of belonging with them?
And we've done student athlete panels as well, so that they can hear straight from the students, you know, what do they want out of a tutor? What helps them connect with a tutor? What do they feel they need in those sessions, which is, I think, really nice that they can hear from the students as well.
I'm going to try to pull down chat without losing it. And Nicole put in focus for us to see that acronym. That's great, because I'm always struggling to make acronyms myself too. And I think you're right. Molly is a great reminder too. And I think those of us who are cognizant of the way of tutor onboarding and tutor recruitment and tutor retention, in a different sort of way of thinking about retention, is how do we make tutors feel like they matter? How do we recognize the fact that they too could be struggling with disconnection over this campus and what that looks like? And so what sort of appreciation models they're sort of building on, I think are ways for us to be sort of cognizant. And we know in these last, hopefully as we move towards the last weeks of the semester, it's hard to like think through all those pieces again. But in what ways are we prioritizing those who work for us? From full-time staff, how do we feel like we belong, to our part-time, temporary tutoring pool staff, and as well as our students. And I think the last thing that we're super cognizant of as well, and something we ask us to sort of conclude, and clearly something we can work through as well, is how do we train our tutors to think about creating a space that includes a student athlete who might not feel themselves or see themselves, as a learner? So in what way can we use inclusive teaching and learning practices to do so? Are you using different modalities? Are you using different kind of examples? Are you thinking through ways in which different individuals learn and process information? So we really have a robust curriculum in terms of thinking of that way, to show us there's multiple ways in which to learn, there's multiple ways in which to tutor, and as a result, you too can work to belong. We're going to watch our time. We're going to talk, and maybe it's a little bit, I think, tied to what Nicole was just saying with her focus program. We've done a not quite similar thing, but a sort of similar thing when we think about, sorry, y'all, not go Kat.
So similar to just continuing the services that we provide when we look at learning specialist services, how do we provide learning support? So how do our learning specialists or assistant learning specialists or strategy tutors or any other title or mechanism where we kind of see the learning model happening in academic supports centers, how do we foster and create that sense of belonging? And I do have to say, Kathleen does the most amazing job at this, and I know that she won't boast about herself, but I will. Her space in her office is a place where, I mean, you could see students of every sport, and it's been beautiful to see, you know, field hockey players, you know, collaborating and talking with football and basketball. It's just, it's really a space where students feel safe and feel encouraged and feel like they can ask any question and not feel less than, or like they're not smart, or like they're not deserving enough to be. I mean, she really creates this incredible and special environment where true learning can happen for the sake of learning. And it's truly incredible to see it. And if I could replicate it, I would. but how do we create that space? And I think Kathleen is so incredibly genuine and builds relationships with the students. And I think as in a learning specialist role, you can have students across, a career, multiple years, multiple semesters. So that helps in building and fostering those relationships to help create that sense of belonging. But what are some ways that we can do that? Or what are some ways that your institutions are doing this?
I'll speak, although I'll tell you right now, I'm incredibly humble and incredibly overwhelmed at the same time. But I think if anything, if I were to say the way in which learning support and specialist work can foster a sense of belonging, it can absolutely do it on the individual level that we've talked about in terms of welcoming our students, recognizing them where they are, celebrating them, figuring out how they learn individually. But I think the work that I do centers out of a learning community model, which sometimes we hear about like in residential programs, if you will, like a living and learning community where students are working in groups, attending events and the like. We're not attending events together in any way, shape, or form, but I do run, as does one of our other learning specialists, like group-based learning support models. And it's really thought out and purposeful in terms of what we see, because we want students to feel that academic work is what we do and what we celebrate, and the moments that challenge us are okay, and the moments that we celebrate each other are okay, and that we grow together. And it's not something that one of us struggles with and meets us individually to sort of like figure out and sort of feel shame for, but rather what we do. And so, yes, we will acknowledge that it sometimes is challenging to have multiple individuals, but you can sort of pair in terms of who's in similar classes, who has similar background, or who can kind of help each other in the process. And we really try to work with scheduling to figure that out. And I think the other thing that you sort of see in process, if it's possible to sort of, that's why I love Nicole's acronym of like focus, because I think it's really this like collaborative, united to succeed space. Because I hope that I'm creating student mentors that someone else can be like, oh, you need a topic sentence when you're writing, or like, oh, have you ever thought about using this sort of resource? And I think once a student who sees themselves as someone who doesn't define themselves sort of academically can help someone else in that moment, it is this moment of pride, and it's pride outside their sport that sort of builds that sense of I can do that. And I think that idea of academic achievement is so crucial to the sense of belonging, to this long-term resilience and grit that we talk about. And I think it all sort of works together. And I think for us, it is that community of learners, and this is sort of what we do. And so I mean, I don't know, I should say I come from a teaching background. So me working with a group isn't a big deal. So having a few people in my room is nothing compared to having a class of like 35. But I think for me, like if there's a way that we can kind of, as professionals, think about something that moves between this individual to this study hall model and kind of works as this collaborative, stealing Nicole's presentation model, but I think there's just such ownership, such potential for student ownership, buy-in, and growth in terms of it. And I think the praise that Kathy says is not about me, but it's about that kind of space that I sort of do. And she's phenomenal too. And I just am not a gusher. Anyway, does anyone else do anything in terms of learning support, whether it's in terms of services you provide, in terms of maybe how you schedule students, how you assign students in development, or anything you talk about in terms of assistant learning support or learning support? I feel it's a harder space to talk through. And if not, that's my usual key of probably not in terms of it. I guess this one I'm really curious too, and this one maybe for you all to kind of think through is, I want to turn to summer transition program, but before that I'm going to check a chat. Oh, great, thanks. Student development support class, right? Grouping students within learning specialists on similar classes, I think too. And thanks to, there's National Tutoring Week in October. Okay. We know that N4A has done a number of programming. I remember last year a webinar specifically that talked about summer programming, transition programming. If those of you have students who come in mid-year, as we do here in January, like in what ways do you think about your first year transition program? In what way do you center a sense of belonging and belonging across multiple spaces, whether it's your campus, whether it's your services, whether it's just student support, whether it's student identity? And we'd love to turn this one to you for a moment and then sort of offer our own kind of thoughts. And we'll also be very cognizant of the time, because I think it's 5:20.
Mhm.
And I think
we I'm student development support because it logged into under my work Google account. So sorry, I'm at ECU. We actually, in a summer bridge program one year, did a complete focus on non-cognitive skills.
Ooh.
And so part of one of our modules or one of our focus goals was a sense of belonging, a sense of academic belonging on campus. And so we actually had the students partner up with someone from campus, because it's very easy, I think, often for our student athletes to have a sense of belonging athletically. They come in and they kind of have a natural family within their team. But often what we find still, and what we found then, is that when they have to branch out, because our athletics complex is distanced from campus. So when they had to go and do things actually on campus, or when it came to talking to faculty or joining an organization that's outside of their safe space, everything kind of on the athletic complex is their safe space. So we gave them a list of people that we had pre-selected who would be interested in serving almost as academic mentors. And we had them choose from the list and pick someone to interview. We had them go and sit down and interview them. And then we ended up doing a networking luncheon. And it kind of was twofold. We worked in etiquette as a part of that, but we had them just mingle. And then we hoped that through that, those individuals would develop relationships, because we had them pick people in potential majors or people they had something in common with, that then they built a relationship and found places and people on campus that they knew, just to start integrating them right from that first summer semester with campus, to go ahead and let them know that there was a purpose and that they did belong, and not just because of their sport.
I love that.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you.
Yeah, we for our football program, I think it was football, men's and women's basketball, I believe. They take we basically had them do a summer transition program where we have them do what do you call it, the scavenger hunt, where they go all across campus to like find buildings and meet different people. So whether it's campus advising or different, like where the different libraries that are on campus. So we look at some of those bigger structures and offices and people and have them do a scavenger hunt. And then we do just like across all sports, having them do like little things like a relay race or things like that, just so that they can kind of get out of, even within their own sport kind of comfort zone. So that's been pretty awesome.
And then I know universities, we've done a limited extent too, like belonging within like the town, the community, whether it's a community service project, whether it's bringing in or linking out that way. So I think like when we think about belonging, we may want to think about it even off campus. What does it look like? Who's there? And thinking about who I am reminds us sort of outside our sport, but also like in the world, like who am I and where do we sort of go in terms of it? We've got a SAC comment as well. So student athlete advisory comment. A social, right? Student athletes in the same like facility too. And transfer students. And there's a whole thing we can do in terms of programming, in terms of what to transfer sort of experience and that sense of belonging, which you're right, is a whole other avenue for us to sort of think through in terms of cultural experience and that sense of belonging and what does it mean in terms of those spheres.
Some other things we've done have been faculty panels for our incoming students. So having a variety of faculty from different departments on campus come and kind of talk about what it means to be a student in college, but also let students ask questions and kind of interact with them so that they can kind of, again, that scary feeling that they get, I'm in college and you're a professor. We want to kind of break those barriers down a little bit. So the faculty panel has helped with that, but definitely I love what all of you are saying.
Yeah, and I think as we kind of, our final thoughts is to think, and oop, I don't know if someone wanted to speak. Molly might be wrapping us up, I think.
Yeah, I was just going to volunteer to say
Go
that
ahead.
at Long Beach State, we have on the Vising side, and we actually have a survey we have them fill out in regards to their academic skills and their differences, and ask them like, what do you think that might be most challenging for them coming into the college? So we have them fill out the survey. That way the advisors get to talk to them during their orientation at registration. And then we have the academic skills class that we have tailored to our student athletes. And then we also teach a University 100 class in regards to, it's more for our undecided students, but it introduces them to, like, we do segments on like, who are you outside of your sport? You know, what are your goals setting? Where do you want to go? And then we teach them about all of our university services. Of course, we do the scavenger hunt. And at the end of the semester, they do a presentation in regards to what major they want to move into. They hear from our student athletes about panels in regards to majors and everything like that for their first year.
And I love how all of the examples of belonging are centering those two axes in terms of academic identity, right? Having a presentation, which even within this fun sphere is sort of building confidence within that, but also the social network. Here's this campus, here are the individuals, like in what way we can grow. And those are the two key components of it that way. And transfer and also what we think about in terms of transfer, second year community college and retention and belonging and those sort of spaces are another kind of way. And I think what I'm so appreciative for today is obviously my colleague, but obviously to LSU, and thank you. I know Dorothy was on at the beginning, but thank you for offering this opportunity for all of us to sort of learn virtually and makes it so much easier for all of us to sort of participate and develop. But all of you who I think shared the ideas of belonging in ways that we know what interests us, what we bring and sort of do. And once we started to hit these 5 points, we were like, we just want to hear what other people do as well and just kind of build that out. And I think from whether it was study hall, through transition programs, through transfer students, through the scavenger hunt, all along the way. And I think we're surrounded by a core of professionals who are rooted in the ways in which sort of belonging matters. So obviously there's ways we can go into this deeper, but we asked to think about how belonging and mattering matters and to sort of centralize that. And I think I speak for Kathy and myself, we probably have a slide that sort of says this. Oh, we have a slide with we're excited. Just in case anyone wanted to, just take a screenshot of that. We'll do that too in a moment. And there's a comment too about inclusive language, which is also another thing we talked through in tutor training. Can I come back to this? I'll come back to this in a moment because I want to just sort of remind, no, I guess we didn't. I thought we put our email on, but maybe not. We did, but we don't know where it is. But feel free to reach out to us if anyone wants to do something involving belonging in these different sort of spaces. It's a topic we'd love to sort of take up. Kathy's going to throw it in chat for us. LSU asks us to do a session evaluation with the QR code and overall conference evaluation. So if you've been part of this in any way, shape, or form, how many sessions you've attended, they'd appreciate that feedback, as would we. And so, oh wait, and so we appreciate you joining us on a Friday afternoon, whatever time zone you are in. We're here in Eastern, so 5:23 with us, 4:23 and 3:23, maybe 2:23 across. And well, thank you. I hope, should I hold up the QR slightly longer?
Thank you guys so much.
No, I'm sure we can probably send it out and chat. If anyone needs, I'll put up, but thank you. Right, Molly, is that okay?
Yep, you're good to go. Yes. And that is available in the document that y'all received in your email as well.
Oh, perfect.
So, yes. Thank you so much for presenting with us too. And thank you to everyone for joining us. And we hope to see y'all in our closing session too.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for a great session.